Hi, everyone. This is F. Paul Driscoll with another episode of Opera News' Sightlines. And my treasured guest is my friend and the magazine's friend, Peter Sellars, the wonderful American stage director and visionary creator of so many brilliant productions and librettist of so many wonderful operas. So, Peter, welcome to Sightlines. Thank you so much for doing this.
A total thrill to be here.
It's a thrill for me. So you mentioned before the cameras were turned on your latest obsession, which is Charpentier's Medea. Tell me about how that came into your life and when is that going to happen in the fall and where?
Oh my gosh, it kind of came into my life because Medea is not my favorite topic, because anybody who's a mother knows that killing your children is not something that happens. But of course, I was just we've been the last few years, every few weeks somebody walks into a school and starts shooting children. You thought,
exactly, yeah.
What is this? And so I wanted to go somehow get inside this. I've never liked Medea in any way, but okay. So I started going through like about 20 Medeas and just trying to find our way through what is it that people do when they're particularly lied to a lot and told that they have a problem and said everything else is fine except you. And of course they know that's a lie. They know that nothing's working. And we're seeing that so much right now in America, where people just get so angry and such a sense that this is all wrong and they got to stop it, and they've got to do something that's horrifying that interrupts the flow of everything and just says, everyone stop right now, whatever you're doing, stop. And dead children are just makes everybody stop. And going into Euripides, going into lots of versions of Medea, the incredible Cherie Moraga's Chicano Medea, there's Toni Morrison's, of course, incredible response with Beloved. I've been pouring into all of that. And then, of course, I discovered Charpentier, who 1687 made a Medea that is so shattering and not just melodramatic, but really goes in depth and in detail, with a libretto that is quite brilliant by Corneille's brother, Thomas, who I never heard of before. But anyway, it's the only opera Charpentier was ever allowed to make. He was allowed in the Paris Opera once. This was it. And they said, do not come back. And it's an intense masterpiece for in 5 acts, with these incredible visionary spectacles at the end of every act, and surreal, heartbreaking, just absolutely heartbreaking from the beginning. And of course, all these men are lying to Medea like crazy, and she's not accepting any of it. And the climax of the piece is just shattering, but shattering because you saw it coming, rather than, oh my God, now what? And you watch it step by step. And of course, as you know, I've worked with Magdalena Kojena for years, particularly in Berlin on the Bach Passions and things like that, and in Melisande and Pelléas and Melisande. And I said to her, come on, let's do this. And she said, absolutely. So her husband, Simon Rattle, is along for the ride. and the Freiburg Baroque Orchestra is stepping in. And we're making a pretty wild version of it, because you've got to address the shapes of it somehow. And I've decided to, with Simon, make a version of it that's, well, what can I say, Paul? In a lot of the, shall we say, Charpentier worked for, and he shared this with Mozart, late Mozart, some of the worst audiences on earth, which are French officials, French court officials.
Uh-huh.
And of course, you need to say to them, okay, this is what we're about to do. And then you have to say, this is what we're now doing. And then you have to say, that's what we just did. Because they're not
Uh-huh.
paying attention. They have no idea. And so everything has to be repeated 3 or 4 times, constantly. Mozart had to do that in Clemenza. When you have a court audience, you just can't assume they're going to be awake. So I've cut a lot of that. And, like most movies these days, you don't know who the characters are till halfway through the film. You don't get the backstory. You don't know all that stuff. You're just plunged into saying, well, wait a minute, what is happening here? And Charpentier responds very well to this avant-garde treatment. And because the piece itself is such a breakthrough and such an avant-garde piece. The sets are by Frank Gehry, which are pretty astonishing. Frank has just gone to create a immigration prison where everything is actually bleeding through the walls. And instead of having these walls hiding people, shutting them, burying them alive, the walls are porous because in Charpentier, all the spirits are appearing and reappearing and reappearing. And the whole place is haunted with these wild spirits of the dead and the spirits of the undead. And all of these, surreal ceremonies are taking place. And people are losing their minds. The king starts going crazy and killing people randomly. And then Medea, who's the angriest person in history, then calls a bunch of women from the underworld to come sing to everybody, say, why are you so angry? Please calm down. Please calm down. The piece is really wild. And in this time of anger and public violence and also a war on children of all things, this piece, I think people will find it really, really moving and consoling, and creates a lot of emotional space that we need right now.
So I know this is a loaded question, but you've got in your history of working with opera, you have such a wide variety of pieces. How do you choose what it is you're going to do? Because you devote so much energy and so much brain power and so much heart and soul to everything you work on, that I would imagine that the commitment for you is enormous. So how do you make that choice? How do you do that sort of first date moment with a work that you've never directed before?
Well, for one thing, it's super basic. What is missing from this picture? You're looking
Yeah.
around every day and saying, what is missing from this? And so for the last couple of years, during COVID, what we couldn't do was say goodbye to anybody. And so I became obsessed with Heinrich Schütz's Musikalische Exequien, which is, he wrote in 1635 in the middle of the plague and the 30 Years' War. And as you probably know, with Heinrich Schütz, when he was a teenager, he went to Venice, to the San Marco Cathedral, and apprenticed with Gabriele, with those multiple orchestras, multiple choruses, all that, hundreds of musicians doing antiphonal stuff from all directions, like 360, 1600 Dolby surround sound. And he went back to Germany, and he made these amazing Psalms of David, lots of them, with like hundreds of musicians. And then the plague hit. And by the end of his life, when he was in his 80s, he made his St. John, St. Mark, St. Luke, St. Matthew, all his passions for 5 performers each, because no one was left. And in the middle of the plague, a friend of his was dying and said, would you write the music for my funeral? And Schütz said, well, let's get together and pick the texts. And they picked 27 sentences from hymns in the Bible and theology about how to die. When his friend died, Schütz set those sentences and became the first German requiem. And so what I've been doing in LA is these last 2 years with working with the Master Chorale, the LA Master Chorale and Grant Gershon, and we staged a COVID ceremony of people saying goodbye because none of us said goodbye. And what it meant to just have a public space where music creates the space, where you can gather, be together, weep, mourn, express all this stuff that we have all bottled up in us because there was never any COVID moment to acknowledge what we're going through.
Yeah.
And all that emotion is repressed. And one thing that music does and opera does is just take all that emotion that you have hidden in some really poisonous locked drawer and just open it, for goodness sakes. And so anyway, so what we just did 2 weeks ago at Open the Salzburg Festival was the Schutz musikalische Exequien, which the translation we're using is music to accompany a departure.
Yeah.
And just made a space to say goodbye to people. And I guess that's what's always on my mind. I'm always saying, what needs to be talked about or expressed or felt right now? What are we not feeling? Like we're living in it and yet we're still not feeling it. And opera is beautiful for opening those locked doors of feeling.
Yeah.
So that's like the basic thing. And then of course, after that, once I figure out, okay, let's try this piece, then you just live with that piece like crazy. And you go, do all the research you can and see all the alternate versions and what versions the composer went through, what was in, what was out, why, when, what was at issue, why wasn't it not able to speak in its own time, so how might it speak now? And because so many great things, of course, in their own time never were recognized and really heard. And so that's part of the work. And then the other thing is sometimes there's a great composer or a great artist whose work didn't have ever really a chance. And that's, of course, Bellini and Beatrice di Tenda. I love doing pieces that people don't really know. I mean, you think you know, but actually don't. And so I love doing those, the Messe in St. Francis or operas that should be out there, and that you want to live with. And they're part of the history of opera and the future of opera in some inspired way, but they don't exactly fit in as standard repertory. They live in some other magical zone. And will never exactly turn into something that's can become any kind of factory product. It's always an act of love. It always requires some special attention, some like moment of stopping traffic and saying, wait a minute, everyone, look at this.
Beatrice di Tenda you have coming up in February, March at the Paris Opera. Now, please tell me how that fell into your lap. I mean, why? Because it's like when we talk about Bellini, obviously Norma, obviously Sonnambula, obviously Puritani, and I think there are some people our age that remember when Joan Sutherland was doing Beatrice di Tenda a little bit. But what about? I mean, this was something which was a near disaster when it first opened, and you've chosen to bring it back to life. How did that happen?
Again, I kind of I've never been into bel canto opera particularly because dramatically it always struck me as a little as frail, and also so many of the kind of cliche conventions of opera are embedded in that form, and so I've kind of never went there. But bizarrely, it made an impression on me 25 years ago, that piece. And yes, in that wacky Joan Sutherland recording, which, as you know, I mean, I think it was once Joan was a worldwide event, Decca said, we're recording all the Bellini operas, whatever they might be. So somebody said, okay, we got to get this one out. And you can tell that everybody's a little tentative about it. And they have to find it's Joan you've heard of. Everybody else is the cheapest young singer they can get. And in 1958 or whatever it was, the cheapest young singer they could find that nobody had heard of was Luciano Pavarotti. And so that recording is kind of funky because Pavarotti's like 12 years old. And it's so unfocused and raw, but there's something, of course, amazing already present. And Joan Sutherland is not exactly a dramatic prima donna, shall we say.
No.
Yet, at the same time, what really moved me was reading about Bellini in going to London a lot. And his trips to London, he got really connected to some British aristocracy and staying in their country home and freezing to death, but being treated well. And it was not Italy and the Italian, opera world. And in London, he heard Beethoven and Mendelssohn. And he
Mhm.
said, what, music can do that?
Yeah.
And I think he was very moved by what Beethoven was attempting to do. But of
Mhm.
course, that there was no Fidelio energy in Bellini, and there's no Fidelio energy in Italian opera at that moment. But although God knows Anna Bolena is, those are masterpieces. There are some of those operas that are just shatteringly beautiful and
Mhm.
politically very, very powerful. But I think Bellini wanted to write his defiant human rights opera.
Yeah.
And and that's what he tried. And he got Mr. Romani, of course, who was in the middle of writing libretti for 25 other people.
Right.
And
Overextended.
and so there's that hilarious story of Bellini getting the Milan police force to go pick him up in whatever city he was in and bring him back so he would write the libretto, with a gun pointed to his head. But anyway, and of course, Romani hated it, and then put a notice, on the front of the libretto and for the opening night saying, this is a piece of crap. I apologize to everybody. So it's never had a good ride. And Bellini had to write it. I mean, they both had to write it in like about, 18 minutes. But I will say, what moves me a lot is I've worked all the time on Fidelio, because you think, okay, that opera
Mhm.
has yet to really properly speak, in my view. Every once in a while it gets through, but it's so complicated. It's such a mess what Beethoven's trying to do, and he never had the right collaborators. And you just never feel it could. And every once in a while, when Tenstedt did it at the Met those years ago, I don't know
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
that was overwhelming. Every once
Yeah.
in a while, somebody just picks it up and shakes it, and it goes to some incredible place. Anyway, for me, one of the most moving things right now is we're living in the presence of more dictatorship than any time in human history.
Mhm.
More cruel dictators, and who are not just showing up with a military coup as in Niger this last couple of weeks, but are being elected, are being voted in. And of course, as you know very well, there are lots of people in this country and around the world who run on a platform of we will destroy culture, and
Right.
they're elected. And right now we have this kind of anti-democratic, I mean, unbelievable open cruelty in public life.
Mhm.
And what is that? And it's not just in small countries in West Africa, or large countries in West Africa. It's all over the world. We're in the teeth of it right now. So I wanted to do a piece that was about this kind of nightmare anti-democratic dictatorship moving in and turning really cruel. And of
Mhm.
course, now the prevalence of torture everywhere. Like, it's fine. Stop complaining. We all do it. And you go, what? What are you talking about?
Mhm. Yeah.
And Bellini went there. And one of the things that I really love about Bellini and Beatrice di Tendo is Beethoven just assumes this permanent power of, like, we are on the right, and the right, it's morally superior what we're proposing, which is freedom and self-determination for all peoples, and that is
Mhm.
self-evident. And the music has this permanent, unbelievable, taste of victory that's in those chords, because this will win. And what's so moving about Bellini is he's treating very parallel subject, but it's so fragile.
Yeah.
And what he's giving you in these incredible field of voce vocal lines,
Mhm.
it's just how fragile a human being is, and how easy it is to just break somebody, and to ruin a human being, and to ruin a society. And you can just actually damage a person or a country. And that unbelievable delicacy, and how sensitive an organism the human being is. We're
Mhm.
not just rough and ready, we're actually unbelievably intricate. And Bellini's music has this incredible vulnerability, incredible fragility, mental strength, and at the same time, the flesh is unbelievably fragile. And I just got so moved by something that is not the usual humanitarian rhetoric, but
Yeah.
has this sense of everything is at risk at every moment. And what we're dealing with is something that it's so easy to ruin all of it.
Mhm.
That's that. And so the piece is heartbreaking because you see the public cruelty of a regime that has no problem with, so to speak, trumping up court cases and with just unbelievably rigid, unforgiving laws and structures, creating just horrible damage. And also using kind of, gossip and all that other stuff instead of news, which, hello, we know
Hello.
what
Yeah.
it is. I think we know what that is. So for me, Beatrice di Tenda is not only a neglected masterpiece, and I would say neglected first by Bellini, because he got out of town. I mean, he was not somebody who really dealt well with conflict. And so I think as soon as it looked like the weather was going to be a little difficult, he ran. And I would love if he had gone back and worked on the piece a little longer, because there are a couple moments you think, oh my God, if he would just give 10 more minutes to that. That's what I feel every once in a while with Mozart. I think, oh my God, if the guy had got a chance to go back and just do this little section again, it would be amazing.
Yeah.
And so anyway, for me, Bellini, that piece is quasi unfinished in a way. And of course, he poured himself right into Puritani afterwards. And then what nobody saw coming, he was dead 3 months later. And so the kind of that Bellini left the world so quickly and so unexpectedly, this does
And so
qualify
young
as
too.
late works. This is one of these last very inspired and I think very committed works that he made. And I'm dying to just go into it and find out what's there. And obviously the famous Joan Sutherland recording that we heard when we were kids doesn't really bear a lot of it going back to, because it is too feeble. And I think the score itself has a lot more power in it. And I would love to have heard Mireille Callas and Tullio Serafin go for it. I just don't think we ever got to hear a cast like that and a conductor like that go really just dig into this work.
This is I don't mean this question to be rude, but this is something which fascinates me about the process for an artist like yourself. You are a scholar and someone who has obviously a wide range of interests, and somehow you do all this research and have all this passion and all this information. And yet when I see one of your shows on its feet, it seems as if everything is starting with the singers in front of me, if you know what I mean. Where do the moments come that you're able to hand it over? Because that's the most difficult thing for a director to do, is hand the piece to the people that are going to be connecting to the audience. And you do it better than almost anybody.
Oh my God. Well, Paul, there's nothing more beautiful than human beings. And you're in the presence where I get the most beautiful thing in the world. You can invite the people you want to the party. And so the people in the room are people you just love. I mean, if you're in the room with Lorraine Hunt, what else are you going to do is just focus completely on her. If you're in the room with Dawn Upshaw, what are you going to do? You're going to focus completely on her. And so for me, all my life, I've gotten to work with just the most amazing people. And so step one is realize you have pure treasure right in front of you in the room. And this is gold. This is the pearl of great price. And here is this beautiful person in front of you singing. And so step one is, of course, everything's going to flow through them and everything is about them and making sure that they're comfortable or productively uncomfortable. I mean, but you want to create a situation that's for them, about them, and really lets them open fully. And so that's the joy of the job. And every piece has so much richness in it. So you're not going to get all of it in any one version of it. You're going to taste what these performers will allow you to taste, which is what they're bringing with them, the particular karma and the particular flavors of their emotional life, and which are expressed vocally, but also expressed in every move, in every kind of stillness. And so the first step is these beautiful people, and of course also we work with astounding instrumentalists. And so and when you get all that going, and when you have a great conductor, and when you have an incredible set of designers, and and so on and so on, the beauty of opera is that you're not alone in the room. It's like you're in the room with the most amazing people imaginable, and so let them work. Let them show what they do. And also the joy is seeing things that go so much beyond anything you ever imagined. And I think for me, if I look at the stage and see my own ideas up there, I say, this is a failure. What you want to do is you want to open this up so everybody's contributing, because everybody has such rich histories and rich life experiences and rich imagination. And so the more everybody on that stage and everybody around that stage is empowered, and then you get something that is a tapestry that goes way beyond whatever ideas you thought you had. And that's a joy. And that's, for me, why this art form is just supreme.
Now, you just did in Salzburg a production of The Indian Queen by Purcell, and that's something you've worked on before, and you just started to say before we were recording that this was not planned as a stage production. You just kind of invited yourself to the party and let it happen. So what was that like? Were you discovering things about it that you hadn't seen before, or?
Well, I mean, again, you hope that every morning you wake up with new ideas that you didn't have yesterday. So, of course, when I'm going back to things, you think, oh, I'd love to do this now. I'd love it. Oh, if I did it again, I would do it this way. And, all that, because you always say, what else could we do with this? And I think that's one of the thrills that I had in my 20s when we worked with Craig Smith on the Mozart da Ponte operas, is we did Così every year for 10 years. And we said, okay, so that aria was really heartbreaking last time. Why not make it really funny this time? And by the time you do that year after year after year, you have so many different approaches and so many different ideas. And gradually, like the music of Mozart, all those things are there. Yes, it's funny and it's heartbreaking. And if you have the time, gradually you can get all those layers in there, which are very satisfying. And just to say, going back to Indian Queen, this Purcell's music is just overwhelming. It goes right through you. And as you know, Purcell, again, this is late work. Purcell, like Bellini, Purcell died at 35, and he was working on the Indian Queen when he died. And so it's incomplete. There's only 45 minutes of music. It was written for a kind of play by John Dryden and Sir Robert, someone who, it's just horrible. It's the Incas versus the Aztecs. It's really ridiculous. And so step one was stripping all that out. And step two was, growing up in America during the Reagan administration, when we were attacking Nicaragua and so on, and supporting the death squads in Guatemala and El Salvador. At Emmanuel Church, we actually had there was a underground railroad site for Salvadoran refugees. And as American artists, we were all saying, wait a minute, what is Nicaragua? What's going on there? Can we understand something that we're not being told by the Reagan administration? And so of course, Susan Macelis was in Nicaragua making those incredible photographs of the revolution and those murals. And we started reading poetry and novels by Nicaraguan writers. And I read Rosario Aguilar's, it's in English as The Lost Chronicas of Terra Firma. The Spanish title is The Birds with No Feet, which is really mysterious. But it's a story of, Rosario wanted to write a story of the conquista, of the Spanish conquest of Central America, through the eyes of women, with women characters. And she went and did all the research in the archives, and the only thing she could find about any of the women were their names. No other information. So she decided to invent an entire scenario. And in the novel, It's that a reporter from the Spanish newspaper El País has come to Nicaragua to cover the revolution. And she's taking this reporter around and explaining things that this reporter would never see with his own eyes. And she made that, turned that, and then every other chapter is set in the conquista of Spanish coming here 5 centuries ago and not seeing anything. And so I took the text from this incredible book. We wrote to her and she said, of course, please. When we did the premiere in Madrid 10 years ago, Rosario, who is now in her 80s, brought 3 of her daughters and 3 of their daughters. So it was 7 power women from Nicaragua showing up. It was thrilling. and the story of the Indian Queen really spoke. And of course, Purcell has all this music that is so rich. And we all know how moved we are by Dido, and we say, but it's 45 minutes long. What if Purcell had been able to make a serious opera like Charpentier's Médée, which is basically the same dates, like he made King Arthur and the Fairy Queen? What if something of that length and that ambition wasn't just silly? And so I said, okay, let's let Purcell make his first full-length serious opera. And using the new libretto, used a lot of Purcell's theater songs, because he wrote for like 50 amazing plays, because as you know, after Shakespeare, the puritanical era in England with Cromwell, all music was forbidden in church and the theaters were shut. And when Purcell was born, the theaters opened that year and music was allowed in church again. And Purcell, when he was 12, his first music teacher was Pelham Humphreys, who was Lully's pupil. And his second music teacher was John Blow, who, when Purcell was 14, and John Blow wrote the quote unquote first opera in English, Venus and Adonis. And then John Blow, when Purcell was 20, John Blow resigned as chief organist of Westminster Abbey, so Purcell could take over. And at the age of 20, Purcell was responsible for the future of English church music. Meanwhile, the Restoration Theater went berserk because there had been no drama allowed since Shakespeare. And one of the things they did in reaction to the Puritan years of total nightmare Christian orthodoxy was to put in play after play pagan rituals. Ancient Rome, Druid stuff, Mayan stuff, African stuff. So there are all these, Purcell is making all these pagan rituals in show after show after show, theater shows. So I used a lot of those rituals. One of my favorites, there's a ritual that we put in called "The Air with Music Gently Wound." What? Wounding the air with music. So you're piercing every molecule and releasing everything that's behind and invisible and that is on the other side of our atmosphere. The air with music gently wound. We're wounding the air with music. I mean, the images are so incredible in these pieces. And of course, music for a while, and some of the well-known Purcell songs, which, when somebody does music for a while in a nice lute recital, you get to this weird phrase. It's all going along just fine, and suddenly it says, "Till the snakes drop from her head." Wait a minute, what? Till the snakes drop from her head? What is that about? And of course, in a Mayan context, it actually makes sense. So with the Indian Queen, we kind of gathered unloved Purcell and a lot of the incredible a cappella anthems that he wrote that are just staggering, of reinventing both theater and English church music from scratch.
So forgive a frivolous question, but of all of these people that you talked about, all these wonderful composers, if there's any one of them that you could meet in real life and collaborate with in person, do you have a choice?
It's out there. I mean, I have to say, I've been very fortunate to work with amazing composers. And so I love that. you know, I'm still, I mean, if you, what went right into my mind when you asked that question was Kaya Sariaho. And of course, I worked with her. It's just, we just lost her
I know,
a
yeah.
few weeks ago, but I think of her all the time. And of course,
Mhm.
there's so many things I wish I could talk with her about now, and
Sure.
and things that we could respond to together, you know, all of that. I mean, I've been very, very fortunate to work with wonderful composers. At the same time, I've also seen that so many pieces don't find their proper place in the composer's lifetime. And
Mhm.
frequently, the nature of the art form is the pieces grow in stature across a longer spectrum of time.
Mhm.
And I always, you know, I feel that Shakespeare has no idea why we love Hamlet. I think he could not imagine what people 500 years later would see in Hamlet. And I
Yeah.
think we see very different things than he saw. And I think that's just inevitable, that gradually over time, these pieces can speak in a way they can't when they're in the world. And I think so much of censorship, you know,
Mhm.
uh, all those things. And as you know, Paul, you know, nobody's autobiography was ever entirely accurate, because you just can't say most of the things. So, so for me, also, it's just great to let a little time go by, and 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 so, and also, I feel I'm able to have a conversation with Igor Stravinsky and Richard Wagner, but I'm happy they're not in the room. So, you know, I think that's also a mercy, is that, you know,
Mhm.
they've stepped out for a moment. Thank you. That's just fine. Because as you know, like someone like Stravinsky is lying about his work every single minute.
Sure.
And none of the things he's saying about it are true. And
Mhm.
I don't really want to argue with him. I just want to, when the time comes, say, well, we can also hear these things in this music.
Sure,
And
exactly.
that's a joy.
Well, for afraid this is all I've got time for, but this has been a complete delight, Peter. And you're so generous with your time as always. And thank
Oh,
you so much for all your kindnesses to me and to the magazine. And we still treasure, you know, having you at the Opera News Awards those years ago, and that brilliant speech about opera not being for kids. You know, it was a wonderful moment.
well, again, just thank you for keeping the ship sailing. This is a really intense time where opera, like most performing arts forms, is fighting for its life,
Yeah,
and fighting for its life in, I think, really productive and interesting ways. And I think it's just high time that a bunch of things have to be reconsidered, and that also, you know, like Purcell, starting from scratch is kind of amazing. And you suddenly say, what are the things we really value? What are the things we need to take with us? And what are the things we can just leave aside for a
yeah,
while?
yeah, yeah.
And that's thrilling. So I think our generation is being asked some pretty serious questions. And from what I've seen of the new generation of composers, the answers coming back are amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Peter Sellars. This is F. Paul Driscoll with Opera News's Sightlines. Thank you for watching, and thank you, Peter.
Oh, Paul, thank you so much.